welcome back to our weekend reflections. We have 4 reflections for Advent, leading into Christmas, I should say. So Jo Durnan's going, as in Josephine, is going to take our reading today. Jo is quite an historian and writer. Newman College, for their centenary year, published a lovely, very insightful, engaging book, history of the college, Newman College, here at the University of Melbourne. And Jo was one of the co-writers for that book. So we have a lovely lady, quite a literate person, to do our reading this morning. So over to Jo.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus said to his disciples, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert. If you do not know when the time, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with a particular task, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore, keep awake in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake." The Gospel of the Lord.
Well, if I mention jazz, rock, and Beethoven, what's the big thing I would get at here is the difference between jazz, rock, and Beethoven. The same thing with seasons that we experience in life, winter and summer and spring and autumn. They've predominantly got their own feel, their own context. Now the same thing with Gospels. They are vastly different to one another. They may hold some things in common. In fact, they say of Matthew, Mark and Luke, they call them the synoptic Gospels because they share a common source, and there's often they can bring a synopsis of the life of Jesus and of proclaiming gospel news to us with a particular style of their own. But within that, they each have a very individual style, and in John, vastly different gospel. So when I talk about rock, jazz, Beethoven, each of the gospels has an extraordinary difference because they're written in different contexts. And really, it's only been in the scholarship in the Catholic tradition of the last 50 years that we've started to recognize the implications of this through extraordinarily good research, pastoral practice. So we're moving from Matthew's Gospel that we started off back in the lock-up time in March, and we've just left behind Matthew last Sunday on the Feast of Christ the King. And today, first Sunday of Advent, we move into the first Gospel written, Mark. Now let's just for a brief moment have a look at the difference. Matthew wrote a Gospel to assure those who were Jewish and who came over from the synagogue and the temple came over to the house churches where the breaking of bread, the Eucharist was celebrated, where they would follow a Jewish prophet, to them the Son of God, and Matthew wrote a gospel that assured the Jewish converts who left the Jewish establishment, "Fear not, who have brought your treasures with you." And so, right through the former reflections, I've been talking about the fact that Matthew's gospel is very, very Jewish. There's a stack of Jewish bridges, if you like, into the Christian life. Now we're going to look at Mark's gospel. Now, Mark is the genius that worked out what a gospel would be, a particular literary form, not a diary, many historical moments, but also the Mark himself imagines scenarios and puts them into the gospel so that the gospel values the deep-seated priorities of Jesus would come to life, would engage us. So it's not so much a preoccupation with the stretching exercise of leaving the Jewish establishment and becoming a follower of the Nazarene. That's Matthew. Mark wrote a gospel from a very different perspective. Mark was almost panicking that this was a dangerous time. There was a sense of a loss of morale in these Christian communities. There was a leakage, people leaving. You pick it up in Mark's gospel toward the end when a faithful follower of Jesus, questioned in the courtyard, runs away into the dark. In fact, his toga or whatever garment he was wearing came off as he ran. Now, the scholars say that this is a very striking moment because it was where one ran away into darkness and left your baptismal robe behind. And it seemed a significant number of people doing this, and it troubled Mark. Another thing we notice in Mark's gospel is Jesus' humanity is really explored, and he gets tired and he gets angry and he's despondent at times. And the crucifixion in Mark, that account, is very stark. And Jesus just holds on. Would he be faithful to the way of the Father? He cries out in agony and, my God, why have you abandoned me? Because that's the feeling of those that are left behind. They're struggling to be faithful. Will they also go? Must you go? That's the sort of feeling that Mark is trying to convey in this gospel. It is all about, it's a time of low morale, and he is trying to recognize the struggle to be faithful and to somehow lift the morale of the community so that they would find peace. So when you know that sort of thing, you recognize what's at work in Mark's gospel we read for this year. Now it's interesting that we've already had the story before that's in Matthew, but it was written originally in Mark, and that's where it's all about how the ruler goes away, he comes back and badly treated, or his servants are badly treated. So the gospel goes on. The story used this Sunday is a very brief gospel passage, we've read before in Matthew, but Mark gives it his own twist. And it's that gospel that talks about the ruler who goes away and leaves the slaves or the labourers in charge. And the gospel says, be aware, be awake, because you never know when the ruler, the king, is returning. Now, when you look at this gospel, what surrounds it, because it's only a short passage, it talks about Jesus in that last few days with the disciples, referring to he can see that he won't be around much longer, that the temple establishment and the Roman occupying power is very focused on getting him because he is disturbing the structures that are there. And they're going after him, and he knows they're closing in on him, and it won't be long before he is taken. And it's pretty obvious that he will be cruelly got rid of. It's pretty obvious that Jesus himself would have had a strong sense that he would get the worst punishment that the Romans could offer, and that was crucifixion, because predictably they did it every year on Passover in Jerusalem to stop the nationalistic feeling of Jewish people that wanted the occupying power of the Romans to get out. So the Romans shrewdly conducted a terror campaign where all sorts of tramps and thieves were disposed of publicly in crucifixion. So there's a fair chance, a high chance, Jesus knew that was on the cards. And also, he knew that the disciples were not really secure in being convinced of his way. So what Mark does here is have a lot of worries of Jesus in going. When I go, they will be after you, and they will hunt you down. They will come into your homes, disturb families. You will suffer because of me. All those threatening sorts of lines, or lines of worry and concern. Now remember, this is perhaps the most important point to understand about the way Gospels are written, that Jesus dies in the early 30s. The Gospel isn't written until into the 70s. And there's a space of time there, 40 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, that the followers are persecuted. And things like the establishment rears up against them. So we're not sure whether these lines that we find in Mark's Gospel are the articulated worries that Jesus had in leaving the disciples, or whether they are the experiences of Mark's community that was draining them, that was shaking them about, that led to the defection from the faithful community. That these things, these factors were at work. So whether it's Jesus' worries in his last week, or whether it's Mark putting into the Gospel, sort of tabulating, if you like, the very concerns that were happening in Mark's communities. And so it looks as though Jesus is saying all this, when in fact it could be a mixture of what Jesus had to say and what was the lived experience of the struggling early Christian community. Again, in Mark's Gospel, the boat's out on the lake and they're just getting swamped. It's going down. Now, of course, the idea of the boat was very much the bark of Peter. Even then, it was to do with the ecclesia, the church, the new community of followers of Jesus. And it's going down. It's being swamped by the forces of nature around it. And of course, that forces of nature stands for the climate, the milieu in which these struggling disciples were trying to remain faithful to the way of Jesus. So, coming back to the sharp, more concise part of the gospel text, what I mentioned here about the rulers hurting and the invasion of people's lives and that sort of thing may have been Mark's experience, but it's put into this narrative. However, what the church people did of recent years when they put together a text was to take a wider text about which I suspect is the Markan experience, and then it goes into the little bit about be aware, you never know when the ruler will return. So it's got that sense that one day that Jesus himself will return in power and bring all things to a close. And we'll talk about that more next week. Now, the last point I wish to make is the turbulence and demands put on the followers of Jesus in the early times of the Christian communities, and perhaps even before they were called Christians, they were known as the followers of the Nazarene. There was all sorts of reasons to be discontented having to follow his way. There was too much pressure on them. They really felt the defection of some of their best community members, and it was hard to remain faithful. Now, translate that early season of demands into our own times. This weekend it's wonderful that we can open St Carthage's church again, because the powers that be had to insist to be locked up to prevent this horrible viral force bringing illness to people, the COVID-19. And many people missed not being able to break bread, receive and share Holy Communion. And it caused often people to feel despondent and let down. But then there are many other sort of factors involved with the COVID-19. People that have lost a significant amount of their savings. Interest rates are so low, and one thought there was enough there to keep a family comfortable until their time of going back to the Lord. But all of a sudden there's a worry over, will our money last? There's a massive challenge now with unemployment. So many people just had to close their shops and businesses because the public, the consumer, wasn't out there buying things. And on it goes that the season we've just been through is yet another sort of season of despondence. And of course, so many lovely people, usually elderly, died in our nursing homes during this time. I conducted quite a number of funerals with people who were infected with the virus. And when you think your grandmother or mother's got another 10 years or 20 years to share family life, and all of a sudden she goes from a chirpy wonderful woman to someone who's gasping for life. So that we can see that in the distress of the moment, cruel moments, inexplicable moments in terms of if there's a good God, why do bad things happen? That was the same sort of thing that was happening in Mark's community that caused Mark to write a gospel so that there would be hope in amongst the shadows. And now there's been another time of shadows for us in terms of the lockdown of recent weeks. So it's about being aware in faith to find his way that will get us through until we reach peace again. So today's Gospel for the first Sunday of Advent reminds us of how Gospels get written, how historical facts and a creative gathering of other experiences of Mark's community get put into the Gospel in the way that Jesus worries and articulates what could happen after I've gone, because it gels with the experience of Mark's community 30 or 40 years on, and in fact comes to us in our communities today. And the prayer for Advent, there's a lovely word, Maranatha, means come Lord Jesus, come quickly again to look after us. These times are draining. Be with us, steady us, so that we are at peace with you and one another. Thank you for watching. I will just say a few things about Christmas coming up in 3 weeks at St Carthage's. Each weekend now we are allowed to have 60 in the church. People say, can you book? No, you just turn up a bit earlier, see if you can get a seat. I've doubled the number of masses so that more people can fit in. So the masses will go 2 masses on Saturday evening, 2 Sunday morning and 2 Sunday afternoon. So that'll happen for the next 3 weeks, and the 4th week is what we're starting this weekend. Now for Christmas, unfortunately the plans to celebrate Christmas in the Wilson Hall at Melbourne University couldn't come to pass because of a ruling about the COVID virus that could be present through this large number of people coming onto campus. So St Mary's College at the university, one of our Catholic colleges, used to be in the hands of the Loreto sisters for many years and still has that spirit of the Loreto sisters about the place. The inspiration of Mary Ward in her quest to enable women of the church to be public figures of life and love. So we're using St Mary's as a big courtyard, and we can fit 300 people in the courtyard. So we're all hoping it won't rain. But there's a whole series of masses. If you look up the website, you'll see they start late afternoon and go through into the evening of Christmas Eve. 2 masses on Christmas Day at 8:30 and 10. So look up the St Carthage's website. All the details are there. Until we meet again next Sunday, we're going to look at John the Baptist and his quest to find where is the one who was to come. It's all about being aware of where is the prophetic voice, where are the ones that help us identify the Son of God. That's the Advent story coming into Christmas. So thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you next week.